Hi there, this is the Angry Diecast mechanic here, about to show you how to install a suspension on a Hummer EV on a Hot Wheels diecast car. Not going to bore you with what inspired me in a long introduction with an overdramatic video intro, but pretty much what it's going to be is simple tools with simple materials that you can get pretty much almost anywhere, from any hardware store to your nearby Walmart. The point of this mod is to get articulation, make it look more badass realistic. Like if you're going off-road, you can use this method with the stock Hot Wheels or with the rubber wheels. In this case, I went with rubber wheels. You're gonna need a power drills, 3/16 drill bit, wire cutters, a mini sawzall blade, tweezers, hot glue with a hot glue gun, and zip ties. Although the hot glue gun you will see in the video, I had to change because unfortunately my Ryobi ran out of power. Carefully, without penetrating your hand, remove the rivets from the top and the bottom part of the diecast car. When removing the rivets, you want to be careful how much pressure you put, and definitely be careful how fast the drill is spinning. Unfortunately, I did over drill it at the bottom end and it kind of ruined the frame a little. Using the wire cutters, I cut the tabs off that hold the axle. You want to be careful not to cut the axle because the metal on that is actually pretty strong, and the wire cutters that I have are pretty cheap because they're small enough to get just the tabs. Using the same wire cutters, I then cut the excess plastic that sits behind each wheel, gives you more ground clearance, and just gives it all overall a nicer look. This little piece of plastic in the middle in front of the rivet hole, you don't have to cut that. That one's not going to get in the way of anything. For this frame, we have a V shape for the rear axle, and then the front axle is just going to be wide open. So we're going to have to do some precision cutting for the front axle, which won't be that hard. For this one, just remember that the V notch is the rear axle and the wide open part is the front axle. Do not get them confused. Now you're going to take the cutting blade, and using the V notch, you're going to start making some light passes. Once you got your cut going, you can start sawing back and forth a little bit easier. I usually just cut until the blade reaches roughly where that square tab was that holds down the axle. You want to make sure every now and then to check that you're cutting in a straight line and it's not veering off to the side or at an angle. The front axle doesn't have the V notches, so I used the plastic tabs that hold down the axle as a guide. Pretty much the same thing as the rear ones. Now just put on a set of wheels, check to see if it's gonna teeter-totter. You're pretty much checking that there's no resistance, no plastic is overhanging or left behind, causing any kind of hang up or unevenness. We're not done yet with the front axle. You're gonna have to put the bottom frame with the interior, and to see where your next cut is gonna have to be. Holding them together, you want to do some light cuts. You're not going to start cutting right away. You just want to make a few simple passes to spark it where your cut is going to be. You want to do this for the left and the right side first before you separate the frames, otherwise your cut is going to be misaligned. You want to take a marker or a pen or something and just slightly mark the plastic tab on the interior, so that way you know in what direction to cut, so that way it stays aligned. Start off with some simple passes. You don't want to go right away sawing away like crazy, otherwise it's going to be misaligned or it's not going to be straight. Once you got pretty well through, you want to take your blade and you want to see that they're both even. If it's at an angle or if one is cut not as deep as the other, you want to try to make that even for future modifications. If you decide to do other stuff, or maybe in the future you decide to cut the fenders off or whiten the fenders, whatever it is, you just want to make sure it's even. Now for the rear axle, because it does have that V-notch, you can just cut those off. You're not gonna need them. It's not gonna affect anything. So I just cut them off. Technically, you could leave a little bit of plastic on there so that way the wheels won't rub on the fenders, but I don't care. Gonna get 2 zip ties out. You're gonna cut the ends off and you're gonna fold them. You wanna give yourself a pretty good amount of length, not too long, just enough that it's gonna cover what you need, and the part sticking up is gonna be easier to adjust and move when applying the hot glue. In the front axle is the rivet hole, and in order to get the maximum coverage over the axle, you're gonna have to cut the end of the zip tie about roughly a 45-degree angle. You can just eyeball that, doesn't have to be exact. I did this a total of 4 times, so 4 individual strands of zip ties. But unfortunately I did mess up, because you'll see eventually that the rear axle doesn't have the issue with the rivet hole. But I left it in the video because I wanted to show the benefits of using the hot glue and how you're able to fix mistakes like that. Had you been using something more permanent, like some kind of Bondo or resin, you wouldn't be able to go back and fix it as easily. I decided to go with rubber wheels. You can do this mod with the stock wheels, but this is just my personal choice. I got these wheels off of Amazon. They come in a pack. You want to put a little bit of hot glue exactly, or pretty close to where I'm putting it here. It's just to mainly hold down the zip tie. You want to make sure the axle is down first and then put the zip tie on. And roughly where the plastic tabs used to be, you want to use that as a guide. You don't want the zip ties to be over the plastic tabs, simply because you want the flexibility and you want the zip ties to be able to hold down the axle. If it's on top of the plastic tabs, you're gonna have a huge gap and it's not gonna do its job. The zip ties are not gonna do their job like they're supposed to. Once you got the zip ties in place and you know exactly where you want them, you want to put some more glue over it and on the edges, and that'll just hold down the zip ties more securely. With the hot glue though, it will heat up the glue underneath again, so with your tweezers you want to be able to hold them down and keep them aligned exactly where you want them. You want to try to hold down both of them at the same time with equal pressure. Now we're going to do the same again for the front axle. Same process, same method. Put some glue down first, so that way the zip ties are held in the correct position that you want. I went to reassemble it in order to check the alignment, make sure it's not leaning to one side. And it's when I realized that it's sitting too low in the front, but also in the back as well, but not as bad as the front. It's pretty much resting on the fenders, and I now have to disassemble it, take off the zip ties, all four unfortunately, but it's not that much of a tweak. Pretty much I take each zip tie and I just bend them in half, so that way they're bending downwards when I go to reinstall them. Pretty much from where they rest is slightly higher to where the axle sits. So by bending them in half, they sit at a downward angle and they'll hold the axle down, as opposed to going straight across and having a larger gap. One of the benefits of hot glue is that you could obviously take it apart and there's not going to be like heavy residue left over, and it's just easier to manage and deal with, and it's not as a pain in the butt to clean up. So I made more work for myself. The reason this is also a good example why you want that extra zip tie plastic, because as you're trying to put this back together, or as I was trying to put this back together, my gloves kept sticking to the hot glue, and it just made it a little bit more difficult than it needed to be. But it is what it is. That's why I like hot glue, because you can fix your mistakes. With the whole car assembled, you want to see that it's sitting nice and level. You may have to take it apart and tweak some more, but when you got it done, you want to put a generous amount of hot glue on the front and rear rivet studs, assemble it back together, and just hold it there until eventually the glue cools down, holding the entire thing together. You want to take maybe some tweezers and just start trying to get some of the spider web or the stringed hot glue off of your car. And pretty much there you have it.